I'm here with Arianna Huffington, and she's the author of Thrive, the third metric to redefining success and creating a life of well-being, wisdom, and wonder. And we were talking about your amazing mother. And one of the things that you talked about how time, she really stretched time. But another thing, a story that was amazing to me, we were talking about death earlier, and as she was coming into her last time on this planet, she did something which you call the Last Supper. I would love for you to describe that to our listeners.
Yes, so the day she died, of course, we didn't know that was the day she would die. She had been very sick. She was at home and she told my sister and me that she wanted to go to this great grocery store in Los Angeles where she could buy food from around the world. So she went there and bought a lot of food, and she was very frail. And she got back home and she laid it all in the kitchen, Greek delicacies and Viennese chocolates and just a real feast. And invited everybody, the housekeeper, the people who worked in my home office, and said, let's all share this meal. And for her, there was no hierarchy. All her life, she always treated people the same. I remember when I was dating an English member of parliament when we lived in London, and one night he brought in Ted Heath, then Prime Minister, for dinner. And my mother was in the kitchen. She was always in the kitchen cooking, and a plumber was there because something had gone wrong. So she asked the plumber what he thought of the Prime Minister. And the plumber said, oh, not very much. He hasn't really been good for working people. So my mother said, okay, let me bring him in so you can tell him directly. And for her, that was completely simple.
That's a natural thing.
That's how life should be. So that a few hours later, she collapsed on the floor. But she knew that was the end. But she didn't want us to take her to the hospital. So she told my sister and me that she was fine, that she would just sit on the floor for a little while and let's open a bottle of wine and just sit there and talk. And my two daughters at the time were young and they were running around on some
scooters
that we had bought them. And
so here your mother is on the floor. You and your sister are there with her. Your two daughters are galloping around the house,
yes.
But, in a natural way. And such a powerful scene that you described there about death and the ease it can be.
Yes, because sometimes we just make death so impersonal and technological. And even when we can no longer prolong life, we just put people on machines. And it's much harder to just have a natural passing. I mean, everybody has to make their own decisions. And at the time, certainly, as her daughters, we were very torn.
Of course.
But she was so strong. And, she was a very strong woman. She had stood up to the Germans in the Second World War when she was in the mountains hiding Jewish girls. And she was surrounded by Germans, and they asked her, do you have any Jews here? And she moved forward and said, there are no Jews here, put your guns down. And they did.
She was fierce. She could be very fierce.
Exactly.
Very courageous.
And so that when she said to me, do not call the ambulance, I'm fine, I knew I had to obey her.
Yes. And then she passed with ease.
Yes. And when she passed, a lot of the things, that was in 2000, a lot of the things that she embodied for me, her relationship with time, the fact that she could not have an impersonal relationship with any human being, all those things became things that I knew I had to integrate more thoroughly into my own life.
You talk about her as, first of all, that she taught you meditation at a very early age, and you're very young, before it was all the rage in Western culture. She also, you talk about her as she would bring all sorts of goodies. Like she'd go to the doctor's office. She would have a fruit basket that she would give to everyone, and she would talk to cab drivers. And, I mean, walking, being with her and traveling around, you just have to let go of time, don't you?
Yes, you had to let go of time, and you're right. She was always bringing things to people, and if anybody came home, whether it was the FedEx man or a parent picking up my daughter, she would invite them to her kitchen, her laboratory,
Right.
and say, "Hey, I just cooked this. Sit down and have something." And her food was an offering for her.
So she had this natural ability to be hospitable to the entire world, so to
Yes,
speak.
and I remember somebody once that she didn't really know admired a necklace she was wearing, and she said to her, "Okay, have it." And and the woman said, "Oh, that's so sweet of you. What can I give you back?" And my mother said, "It's not a trade, darling. It's an offering."
Just beautiful. A wise, wise woman. We're talking about, really, we're getting into that giving part of the third metric, the giving part, the first part, well-being, wisdom, wonder, and now giving. And let's say something about giving. And there's a term that's used, social entrepreneur. What's a social entrepreneur?
So there are many ways to give. A lot of people now who become social entrepreneurs give by combining what makes business work, business practices, with making a positive impact in the world. It could be in this country, it could be anywhere around the world. Whenever there is a need, food, clean water, eyeglasses, whatever, it can also be a business if you run it primarily in order to have a positive impact. And the giving is really perhaps the one pillar of these four that brings it all together. Like there is no life that is really fulfilling and where you're really thriving if there is no giving there.
So what you're saying is that we can do all of our inner work, we can meditate, we can go to our gratitude practice, we can do all of that. But if we're not making an impact in the world, what good is that? It's like living in a cave.
Right. And it can be, again, it doesn't have to mean leaving your home and going to Rwanda to run an orphanage, although I really deeply admire people who do that. It can mean when you get up in the morning, how personal are your connections with people? Are there any small kindnesses, acts of generosity that you practice that day? So it doesn't have to be turning your life upside down, but it can be transforming your life by recognizing our connection with other people. And if we can make one life a little easier, if we can make one person breathe a little easier, that's giving. So we need to recognize that it doesn't have to be grand. It can be very, very small, but significant.
I remember someone on the program years ago was describing just what you're saying in that I think Michael was hosting and saying something about, well, how can we help somebody in Rwanda or in India or something? And this person said, look for what is close to you.
Yes.
Look at your own environment and see where you can make a difference right there. That's was the advice.
I love that. It's what is underfoot, what is right there that often we are missing.
Right.
And that's something that we can incorporate in our lives. And interestingly enough, at any moment in our lives, even at a moment when we are at our lowest, I write in the book about a friend of mine who lost her job, and she had always had a job. And I said to her, now as you are looking for another job, I said, this might be a good time to go to a place called Home, which is a place for at-risk children in South Central Los Angeles, and volunteer. And at first she looked at me like I was completely heartless.
I mean, she's looking for a job. You're telling me to volunteer? Yeah.
I said, it will really make a difference. And she did it. And it made a difference on so many levels. First of all, it put her own problems in perspective. She was telling me how they would do this circle every night and they would forgive, a forgiveness circle. And she forgave her daughter for forgetting her birthday. And the young woman next to her forgave her father for killing her mother. So suddenly, it was even easier to find a job because she was no longer feeling that somehow the life wasn't fair, that look what happened to her. And when we live life from that place of grace and trust, good things happen. And when bad things happen, we are in a much stronger position to deal with them. And one of my favorite quotes in the book is from Rumi, who said, "Live life as though everything is rigged in your favor."
I love that quote. Live life as if everything is rigged in
In
your
your
favor.
favor.
I just love that. It just is, it gives us so much hope and optimism for the future, even when we're in the midst of the cauldron, so to
Yes.
speak. Yeah. Well, Ariana, I want to thank you so much for being part of the New Dimensions guest family.
I want to thank you very much. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for all the heart that you put into what you are doing.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Arianna Huffington. She is the founder of Huffington Post, and she is also, her recent book is Thrive, the Third Metric to Redefining Success and Creating a Life of Well-Being, Wisdom, and Wonder. And if you'd like to know more about the book and her work, you can go to huffingtonpost.com/thrive. Or you can get there through the New Dimensions website, newdimensions.org. I'm Justine Willis Toms. You've been listening to New Dimensions.